The servo locks disengaged with a wet, ugly hiss that cut through the absolute quiet of the great rotunda. Kalen Vance didn't flinch as the crushed ceramic composite fell to the polished marble floor with a deafening clatter. Dark, coagulated blood stained his undersuit, stark beneath the harsh luminescence of the assembly hall. Warlord Gorath's arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a nervous twitch of his mandibles. Scars tell the stories that pristine metal never could, and Kalen's torso was a ruin of jagged lines and hasty combat sutures. It turned out, perfection was a lie the rest of the galaxy told itself. 20 minutes earlier, the mood in the Galactic Concord had been vastly different. Gorath, towering and resplendent in his frictionless ablative plating, had commanded the floor. The warlord moved gracefully, demonstrating energy defenses that absorbed heavy plasma blasts without leaving a single carbon score on his chest. The assembly of elders had murmured in deep, resonant approval. Humanity, their shifting eyes seemed to say, was hopelessly outmatched. Kalen had just sat at his designated terminal, breathing through the sharp, radiating heat in his broken ribs. His own gear, standard issue from Terra Prime, was a disaster. It was armor hammered in the fires of impossible odds, dented, fused, and scraped down to the bare carbon weaving. Outpost Eithilgard hadn't been a conventional firefight. It was an execution interrupted. He had been the only physical obstacle between 300 evacuating colonists and a relentless swarm of raiders. Arbiter Xylos, a tall being of crystalline symmetry, had turned their faceted gaze toward the solitary human. "And you, Representative Vance," Xylos chimed, the translator implant buzzing at the base of Kalen's skull like an angry wasp. "Your species claims equal standing in this coalition, yet Warlord Gorath flaunts impenetrable defenses while your plating is fractured, deficient. Come forward, demonstrate the superiority of your weathered equipment." Kalen stood, his left knee joint ground in protest, shattered metal scraping against deformed servos. Every slow, heavy step down the central aisle was an agony he swallowed behind a rigid jaw. The scent of copper, sweat, and burned synthetic flesh trailed behind him. The alien delegates leaned from their elevated pods, eyes blinking in a dozen different configurations. They expected a trick, a concealed shield burst, a hidden kinetic dampener. They expected some hidden marvel of engineering to rival Gorath's gleaming shell. Gorath crossed his massive arms, his polished armor reflecting the overhead lights in blinding streaks. "A localized kinetic barrier?" the warlord sneered, his vocalizers amplifying his disdain. "Or perhaps your species simply relies on dying quietly." Kalen stopped at the center podium, letting the silence stretch. He looked down at the dead diagnostic readouts on his wrist. His suit had no power left. The battery had burned out 48 hours ago while he was manually holding a compromised blast door shut so the last transport could clear the dock. But when the power cord dies, the human heart takes over. Kalen raised his hands, heavy and trembling slightly from severe muscle fatigue, and gripped the manual release levers at his collarbone. The deadliest weapon on the battlefield is the will to survive. An outpost Eithilgard had proven that beyond any doubt. He stared directly at Xylos, then at Gorath, and pulled the releases hard. The heavy plasteel collar clattered against the marble podium. Then the chest plate dropped, striking the floor with a dull, hollow thud. No shimmering energy fields flared to life beneath it. No secondary kinetic dampeners hummed. There was only Kalen, breathing shallowly through a mess of trauma bandages and synthetic skin grafts. His torso was a map of brutalized flesh. A jagged plasma burn traced a charred path from his left shoulder down to his abdomen. 2 temporary stabilizing rods protruded laterally from his floating ribs, bolted directly into the bone to keep his lungs from collapsing. A collective sound, a shivering exhalation of breath and clicking mandibles rippled through the rotunda. The great pristine assembly was entirely unprepared for the sight of someone who had actually been broken to pieces and simply refused to stop moving. Truth is, the human body wasn't designed for this, but Eithilgard hadn't offered a choice. Gorath's mandibles parted, his massive armored frame suddenly looking less imposing and more like a decorative statue. You Your internal organs should be failing. You have no structural support. I have my spine, Kalen rasped, leaning heavily on the podium. His voice was a dry scrape of gravel. And I had 300 evacuees waiting for the transport bays to cycle. He unclasped his left gauntlet. It fell, revealing a hand purpled with deep tissue bruising, 2 fingers splinted with scrap metal and medical tape. Arbiter Xylos leaned forward from the elevated dais. The shifting facets of their face caught the harsh overhead light. Representative Vance, your equipment failed you. This is a demonstration of systemic collapse. Why display this ruin? Because my equipment didn't fail, Kalen said. He coughed, a wet sound that made several delegates wince. It took the hits it was designed to take, and when it couldn't take anymore, I took the rest. He turned his bruised, exhausted gaze toward Warlord Gorath. The towering alien's frictionless plating caught the room's illumination flawlessly. Not a single scratch. Pristine conditions are a luxury of those who arrive after the fight is over. Kalen continued, his voice steadying, finding an anchor in the memory of the Eithilgard docking bay, or those who run before it begins. Gorath stiffened, a low growl rumbling in his throat, but he didn't step forward. The space between them felt impossibly wide. Gorath had the galaxy's finest defense. Kalen had nothing but ruined tissue and bone. Yet, looking at the two of them, the assembly understood exactly which one of them had held a doorway against a swarm of raiders for 2 agonizing days. It turned out that having the best resources meant very little if you didn't have the stomach to bleed for someone else. Xylos slowly rose from their seat. The Arbiter raised one slender, crystalline hand. The room fell into absolute deafening silence. There were no murmurs of superiority now, no sneers directed at Terra Prime's crude engineering. "We value survival," Xylos intoned, the translator stripping the musicality from their voice, leaving only cold, hard respect. "We value the integrity of the shield, but a shield that has never been struck is untested glass." Xylos bowed their head. It was a shallow, deliberate tilt, but the gesture sent a shockwave through the delegates. Slowly, row by row, the assembly followed suit. Gorath remained rigid for a long moment, staring at Kalen's shattered chest, before he too lowered his gaze, his polished armor suddenly looking absurdly out of place. Kalen gripped the podium to keep from swaying, his breath hitching over his broken ribs. He didn't smile. He just closed his eyes, finally allowing the adrenaline to recede, knowing the line at Eithilgard had held.